local treatment? Well, one may argue that surgery is local. Yes, you go in, remove the tumor, and you come out. But something as biological as radiation, which penetrates paper, the human body, metal, a thick water column, or a concrete slab, how can that be a local treatment? Also consider the manner in which we deliver our radiation beams. It is typically multi-directional beam delivery. In order to focus on a tumor this big of size, often we end up irradiating the surrounding volume to lower doses. So it's not as focal delivery as we would assume. So, the nearby normal structures receive quite a bit of radiation spill. Also consider how diffuse the immune system itself is. Apart from these rests of lymphoid tissue in the lymph nodes or in the appendix, there are also circulating lymphocytes which are moving through the blood, and we never know what part receives what dose. So the effects that the interaction of radiation versus the immune system that are produced, they are far from local. Historically, radiation has been considered to be immunosuppressive based on older treatment techniques with large fields that included substantial bone marrow radiation or the circulating blood volume, resulting in reduced blood cell counts. And also, because of this property, it has been used as part of total body radiation regimens for stem cell transplant. But we also know that radiation has an immunogenic effect. Radiation causes the dying tumor cells to release something which is called the high mobility group box1, HMGB1, which is a danger signal that attracts immune cells to the tumor microenvironment. Also, this HMGB1 interacts with the dendritic cells and brings about an increased interaction with them, leading to cell-mediated death. So in short, radiation-induced killing of tumor cells leads to release of certain substances which again stimulate the immune system and bring about immune-mediated killing. At any given point, the tumor immune system balance exists in one of three phases: the escape, equilibrium, and elimination. In the tumor escape phase, there is a predominance of factors which lead to tumor growth. For example, poor antigenic expression by the tumor or antigenic masking, downregulation of MHC class I molecules by the tumor microenvironment, and also aberrant tumor vasculature. And there's increased interstitial tumor pressure, which inhibits the T cells to penetrate into the tumor cells and bring about a destruction. In addition, there are myeloid-derived suppressive cells, MDSCs, which limit T cell division and differentiation. The cytokines which are secreted by these, for example, interleukin-6, TNF-alpha, which inhibit T cell function, and expression of negative regulatory receptors on T cells, which decreases the T cell mediated immune recognition and tumor attack. In the equilibrium phase, both tumor escape factors and the immune mediated tumor kill, they are more or less balanced. And in the elimination phase, there is a predominance of immune mediated tumor killing. T cells are more effectively able to recognize the tumor cells and kill them. This is brought about by binding of the T cell receptor to MHC molecule with specific tumor specific peptides, and killing is generally done by the FAST pathway. So where does RT fit in all this? Answer is, it fits everywhere. Right from the release of immune attractant substances in the tumor microenvironment to tumor antigen unmasking and accentuated release of antigens, detection of tumor antigens by the APCs, activation of APCs themselves and their active recruitment into the tumor through normalized vasculature as brought about by radiation, migration of these activated APCs to the draining lymph nodes, processing of peptides, presentation of these peptides as part of MHC to the T cells, T cell activation itself, their proliferation, increased expression of MHC class I molecules, and finally the T cell attack on tumor cells, which leads to control of not only the primary but also the metastatic lesion. A subset of T cells become memory T cells, which are helpful in sterilizing the micrometastatic disease and in preventing recurrence. And the oft-documented abscopal effect of radiation. In this effect, localized treatment of a tumor causes not only a shrinkage of the treated tumor, but also of tumors which are outside the scope of the localized treatment, hence the term abscopal. As we see here, this directly treated tumor, because of the cell kill by radiation and the immunogenic effects, the APCs which are activated from here, they present the antigen to the T cells circulate, reach a distant site, and bring about the cell-mediated killing of that abscopal tumor. So now we have not 4, not 5, but the 6 R's of radiobiology. Apart from repair, repopulation, reoxygenation, redistribution, and radiosensitivity, we have a 6th R, that is immune-mediated tumor rejection. But RT alone is not enough. The humoral and cellular immune responses can be seen following radiation alone, but these are generally low-level immune responses, and often they require external help to be of clinical significance. And what is that help? Immunotherapy. Through one or more mechanisms, immunotherapy drugs accentuate the effect of RT itself. The most widely studied immunotherapy drugs are checkpoint inhibitors, which regulate the various checkpoints during the immune-mediated cycle. Ipilimumab, which is anti-CTLA4, and pembrolizumab, which is anti-PD-L1, are the drugs most often studied. Ipilimumab has working at the APC T-cell interaction, that is at the level where the antigen-presenting cells present the tumor antigens to the T cells. And pembrolizumab acts at the anti-PD-L1 level, which is T-cell mediated killing of the tumor cells. And this synergism of radiation and immunotherapy works for our favor. It boosts immune-mediated tumor cell kill, and their non-overlapping toxicities are a boon. Imagine the situation like this. This is the escape phase represented, where tumor cells bearing antigen T, they are sort of hiding from the immune system. There is downregulation of tumor antigens, antigen masking, aberrant vasculature, everything. Whereas the host immune system, even though competent and present, is unable to identify the tumor and bring about its lysis. Until, of course, we do an airstrike on the fortress by means of radiation and bring about a breakdown of the fortress. So after this fortress collapses, there's upregulation and unmasking of tumor antigens, which are free to be acted upon by the host immune system. Additionally, RT induces a beneficial effect on the immune system itself. It makes it more immunogenic. And the immune system is now like an army. Air Force, there's attack from above, the army is also activated, and together they bring about an attack on the tumor cells. Add to it the Navy coming in through the bloodstream in the form of immunotherapy, and these three together are able to bring about cell destruction, tumor cell destruction. Radiation and chemotherapy, when combined, cannot attain appreciable tumor control without adding some degree of normal tissue toxicity. But with a combination of radiation and immunotherapy, because there is selective identification and killing of primary tumor and the metastatic cells, we may have a scope for ultimate conformality, both for controlling the primary tumor and the metastasis. Thus, we are able to locate, chase, and kill each tumor cell based on its identity. But it is not so easy. Combining two different modalities raises a lot of questions. What would be the ideal radiation dose and fractionation to be used, the size of the treatment field, the type of radiation to be used, the target site, the sequencing, which one should come prior, which are the ideal patients, what trials should we do, and what endpoints should we select in those trials. So, as per the preclinical studies, we know that conventional fractionated radiation targets the DNA. The type of death is post-mitotic death. This may also hold true for hypofractionated radiation with low dose per fraction. However, ablative doses or SBRT, which employ 6 or 8 gray per fraction, here the vascular, the direct cytotoxic, and the immune-mediated effects predominate. Preclinical studies that have been done on murine models, some studies have shown that 2 gray into 5 fractions resulted in greater tumor response as opposed to a 10 gray single fraction dose. Conversely, some studies have shown that 10 gray single fraction is more immunogenic. But majority of the studies agree that hypofractionated radiation, 8 gray into 3 or 6 gray into 5, they are able to generate the maximum abscopal tumor responses. The same thing is repeated here. 3 fractions of 8 gray or 5 fractions of 6 gray remain superior to all other regimens in terms of bringing about a synergism between radiation and immunotherapy. The next important parameter is the size of the treatment field. We know that circulating lymphocytes are highly sensitive to radiation. Larger treatment fields expose a greater volume of circulating lymphocytes to radiation and also impact the proliferating T cells. They have a potential T cell priming in draining lymphatic regions. Even with smaller, more conformal radiation fields, if the regimens are they expose the circulating lymphocytes to lymphotoxic doses which may exhaust the T cells. So strategies to reduce the RT-induced lymphopenia include hypofractionation, reduction in the treatment field size with highly conformal techniques such as SRS and SBRT, and shortening of the beam-on times during treatment. Remember, we have to immunomodulate, not immunosuppress. For the same reason, protons may have a dosimetric advantage over photons in terms of irradiating much lesser immune tissue surrounding the primary tumor. What is the ideal target site to be irradiated? Now, body has different organs and they have their own immune tolerances and immune functions. The cells in the skin, gut, and lung, they are at constant exposure to external pathogens. The liver is from exposure to the GI pathogens. So these are organs which can elicit immune response. Nodal irradiation, although it is known to enhance local control in node-positive disease, but may also reduce the proportion and the absolute numbers of the CD8 T cells. It may also increase the levels of T cell chemoattractants, so there may be a mixed response if you choose a node as an irradiation site. So identifying which irradiated sites best elicit a local and systemic tumor response will be critical in identifying the patient subgroups that could maximally benefit from combined RT and immunotherapy approaches. Although abscopal responses have been seen with RT given to bone metastasis, it is notable that most published reports demonstrating abscopal responses have mainly resulted from RT directed to visceral mets. What is the ideal sequencing and timing of radiation? Some studies say you give radiation prior, others say you give immunotherapy prior, but it is also dependent on the type of immunotherapy being used. So most cases of abscopal responses in CTLA-4 blockade have occurred in patients who received RT concurrent or immediately after immunotherapy. In studies with PD-L1 blockade, they have improved survival in patients who received RT prior to immunotherapy. Majority of the ongoing trials either utilize concurrent or RT shortly after a course of immunotherapy. And this is the same thing. I just skip this slide. And how do we select our patients for trial enrollment? Some important factors like the degree of myelosuppression, overall tumor burden, the neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio, and prior exposure to radiation and chemotherapy play an important role. Depletion of immune cells decreases likelihood of immune response. So patients who are already immunocompromised, they have decreased lymphocyte counts, they may be poor responders to treatment. Tumor burden at the time of intervention with immuno and RT may influence the outcome. So patients with significant metastatic burden have been shown not to benefit from a combined approach. So limited disease burden, although oligometastatic disease, they have shown better survival with these outcomes. Conventional trial endpoints like progression-free survival, local control, and disease-free survival may be less relevant while measuring responses to immunotherapy. The traditional RECIST criteria may fail to account for responses to immunotherapy because while delivering immunotherapy, there may be a transient increase in tumor size, and this may preclude appropriate assessment. So specific immune-related response criteria have been proposed. In this immune assessment criteria, if there are new measurable lesions and new non-measurable lesions of variable sizes, it does not define progression per se. Whereas in the conventional RECIST criteria, it always represents progressive disease. Regarding the non-index lesions, they preclude labeling the disease as CR. Whereas in this, we know the cutoff is there of more than 50%, less than 50% for defining other solid tumors. So we have two broad ends of the spectrum. In case of assessing immune response, if there is a 100% decrease in the index lesion and the new lesions and the non-index lesions, then you can label it as IRCR, complete response. And if there is a more than 25% increase in the index lesion, along with whatever status of the non-index lesion, only then shall it be labeled as progressive disease. Anything in between will be PR or stable disease. Also, it is important that initial responses should not be considered the final responses. We should always have a second consecutive assessment at least 4 weeks apart to understand which way are we headed. So improved methods of monitoring response after immuno and RT are being developed, but clarity is still far from what the reality is right now. At present, OS, safety and toxicity, and quality of life appear the relevant endpoints to be studied. So what are the clinical outcomes that we have actually seen with combination of radiation and immunotherapy? Going through PubMed, well, there were so many results, it almost looked like a COVID graph to me. So I narrowed down the search to SBRT and immunotherapy, and still I could see about 100 results. The first demonstrated effect of abscopal effect was seen as far back as 1969. From then on, there have been numerous studies and in numerous treatment sites where such responses have been demonstrated. Be it lung, kidney, thyroid, you name it and you have it here. And the irradiated sites were bone metastatic lesions, lymph nodes, primary tumors, and the list goes on. In this study by Hodgson et al., what they did was they had a case of metastatic melanoma, which presented as a paraspinal mass and also hilar nodes and splenic lesions. They started him on induction ipilimumab, and somewhere down the line between August 2009 to January 2011, the disease showed no signs of regression. In fact, it was progressing. So here in December 2010, they directed radiation to the paraspinal mass while continuing ipilimumab. And what they found was that as time progressed, about 1 year on, they had complete response at the primary and at the metastatic sites. Concurrent with this response, they measured the levels of HLA-DR expression and the number of myeloid-derived suppressor cells. So what they found was that there was a steady increased expression of HLA-DR after radiation, and also there was a steady decrease in the inhibitory myeloid-derived suppressor cells, which suggests that after giving radiation, there was an immune response which favored tumor response. This was followed by the proof of principle trial by Golden et al. In this trial, they had stable or progressing metastatic solid tumors which were on single agent chemo or hormone therapy with at least 3 distinct measurable sites of disease. They were treated with concurrent radiation, 35 gray in 10 fraction over 2 weeks, along with granulocyte macrophage colony stimulating factor, GM-CSF, injected daily for 2 weeks, starting from the 2nd week of radiation. The primary endpoint was the proportion of patients with an abscopal response, which was defined as at least a 30% decrease in the longest diameter of best responding abscopal lesion. So they got a response in the majority of patients. The degree of response varied. So these bars on top of the line are lesions which had progressed, and the ones on the bottom are the ones who had a response. And what they found was that in the responders, the median OS was 20.98 months, as opposed to only 8.3 months in the non-responders. And this was statistically significant. So this was proof of principle. What they had believed to be true happened actually in the clinic. Now, majority of the studies combining radiation and immunotherapy have been in these sites. The lung predominates by far, followed by the prostate and metastatic melanoma. So I'll discuss the lung in the greatest detail of all these, and the others I'll just touch. Although there are numerous sites which are under trials for evaluating different combinations. So durvalumab and its combination with chemoradiation has been a game changer in the recent years, according to the results of the PACIFIC trial. In this trial, durvalumab, which is a human selective anti-PD-L1 monoclonal antibody, and with the backup of preclinical evidence that chemoradiation may upregulate PD-L1 expression in tumor cells, so it was hypothesized that PD-L1 blockade may help restore the systemic and long-term immune responses after chemoradiation. was used as a consolidation therapy versus placebo in patients with stage 3 unresectable non-small cell lung cancers who did not have disease progression after platinum doublet based chemoradiation. The radiation doses were between 54 to 66 gray, keeping the mean lung dose between 20 gray, less than 20 gray, and V20 less than 35%. The durvalumab dose was 10 mg per kg IV given every 2 weekly for up to 12 months. It was started anytime between day 1 to day 42 after CTRT. A 2:1 randomization between durvalumab and placebo was done. And an exclusion criteria was if the patient had received prior immunotherapy within 4 weeks. The primary endpoints to be assessed were PFS and OS, and secondary endpoints were 12-month PFS, 18-month PFS, 24-month OS, objective response rate, the duration of response, and the time to death or distant metastasis, and also the safety. Patients were well balanced between the two arms with respect to baseline patient characteristics. The radiation doses, majority received between 54 to 66 gray, and these were well balanced. As far as response was concerned, it was either partial response or stable disease in roughly 50% cases. A small minority of patients had a complete response. PD-L1 testing on tumor samples was not mandatory for inclusion in the trial. However, on post-hoc analysis, they observed that patients with PD-L1 expression less than 25% or PD-L1 expression unknown constituted the majority of the lesions. And this is the curve showing the progression-free survival. So as we can see clearly that the median PFS with durvalumab was 16.8 months as opposed to only 5.6 months for placebo. The 12-month PFS was 55.9% versus 35.3% for the durvalumab placebo arm. The 18-month PFS was also clearly superior. In a post-hoc analysis, they also observed that starting durvalumab within 14 days after completing chemoradiation appeared to have a greater PFS efficacy than starting it after 14 days. In terms of other parameters like objective response rate, ongoing response at 18 months, median time to death or distant metastasis, there was also a clear difference between the two arms. In terms of adverse effects, well, durvalumab had slightly worse adverse effect profile, but the differences were not statistically significant. It led to drug discontinuation in about 15.4% of cases. On a subsequent analysis of PD-L1 status, it was found that the PFS benefit with durvalumab was preserved irrespective of the PD-L1 expression. And we can see these hazard ratios over here that for PD-L1 less than 25%, the HR was 0.59. So it was a lesser magnitude of benefit, but there was still benefit as opposed to for those who had PD-L1 expression more than 25%. Which means that there are mechanisms other than the durvalumab-induced stimulation of immune system at play. And what other mechanisms could it be, apart from the highly immunogenic effect of radiation, which is magnified by addition of durvalumab? Adverse events, the main adverse event was cough, which was not statistically different in both the arms, and pneumonitis was seen in grade 3 or grade 4 pneumonitis was seen in 2.6% of patients with placebo as opposed to 3.4% with durvalumab. They have an update published in December 2018 in which they reported the overall survival. So overall survival median in the durvalumab arm was not reached versus 28.7 months in the placebo arm. 12-month OS was 83.1% in the durvalumab versus 75.3% in the placebo arm. And 24-month OS was 66.3% in durvalumab versus 55.6% in the placebo arm. These differences were significant.